Okay, welcome to our second session of day two at Building Life Science Adventures 2023. The topic of conversation for this session is how do we bring in more diversity from bench to boardroom? So obviously an incredibly important topic. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we get going. If you don't mind keeping your microphones on mute, that would be great. However, we do like these sessions to be really interactive, so we'd encourage lots of questions and thoughts into the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. Just to highlight as well that we do have closed captions enabled, so if you do require that accessibility, that's switched on. And I think that is it from me. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded and all of the recordings will be made available after the session. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Angie Miller, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Thanks, Jazz. Hi, I'm Angie Miller. I'm a senior business manager at LifeArc. I have a technical background. My background is cancer gene therapy, and I've been in the technology transfer sector for coming up to 20 years. I sit on several boards, and these are related to my profession, both through my work and also through voluntary participation. What I'd like to do is really introduce you to the amazing panel that we have here. I'll just run through and each will introduce themselves. So we've got Alicia.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. So my name is Alicia Hegarty. I'm the Associate Director at the Future of Work Institute, which is part of CPL Group, Talent Solutions Organisation. We're based in Ireland. You can tell by my accent I'm based in Dublin, but we're also based in the UK and across Europe as well. And really at the Future of Work Institute, we work with a range of clients on attraction, engagement and retention strategies for them, and how other areas such as diversity and inclusion all play a really key part in maintaining your culture and attracting people into your organization, making them want to stay, encouraging them to stay. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. So thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. And we've got Renos.
Hello, everyone. I'm Renos Sava. Apologies for my slightly crackly voice. I'm not too well today. I am currently a senior lecturer at Birkbeck, University of London. A couple of decades ago, founded a startup, which is the SME these days, DomainX in Cambridge. I have been teaching a course called MSc Biobusiness for a few years, and that's an interesting take on diversity in itself, because Angie mentioned her background was a technical one, and I think what we tried to achieve with the masters was perhaps you could get into life sciences business roles without the usual PhD background. So happy to be part of the conversation here today.
Thanks, Renos. We've got Kat.
Hi everyone, I'm Kat Arney. I'm the founder and chief creative officer at First Create the Media, and we are a science communication company that specializes in working with the life sciences. So we work with a lot of startups, scale-ups, and much larger companies in the life sciences. So we're working with everyone from, CEO and board level all the way down, helping companies communicate their science and their stories to the audiences that matter. So I'm really interested in this idea of diversity, and particularly sort of how we present companies to the world, who gets to speak, how can we encourage working environments, and then myself having set up and running my own small company, how do I encourage diversity and make it a welcoming environment with opportunities for a range of people.
Thanks, Kat. And Philippa.
Hi, so I'm Philippa Clark. I work for SRG. I've got 20 years of supporting biotechs and startups with life sciences recruitment. So I work with a lot of companies that are growing, and we do talk to companies a lot about diversity and inclusion, how we can support them in terms of mapping a diverse range of candidates for them. So it's a subject I'm really passionate about, and I think it's an ever evolving subject. So I'm really excited to sort of start the discussion today.
Thanks, Philippa. Before we go into this discussion, I just wanted to put things in context. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about beyond the protected 9 characteristics. So we're talking about even intersection. So it's really where the broadest possible sense. So, you know, going into this, I think the first thing is really just to ask the panel, really, why is diversity important to you and your establishment, and how has it helped you in your business, your role? If we start with you, Alicia.
Yeah, so I mean, well, at the Future Work Institute, we like to think that you know, we're living and breathing you know, diversity and inclusion and trialing a lot of different things. And we've a really diverse range of individuals on our team. But equally, what we've seen within our own team, but also with the clients that we work with, is really having a broad range of people, culture, diversity of thought really lends itself, and there's a lot of research behind this as well, lending itself to innovation, creativity, growth. And it can have, we've seen, you know, where we've kind of implemented a number of diversity and inclusion programs for clients, is really where it can enable, it can be a really strategic enabler for a lot of those things. So I think it's a really key business asset for organizations to consider, in my opinion.
And Reynolds, would you like to address that question as well? You know, why is it important to you and your establishment and your role from your perspective?
Sure. Well, I've been working for Birkbeck for a long time, and Birkbeck in London is quite a unique university in that it offers evening education to people who are already working or have other kinds of responsibilities that preclude them from studying in the daytime. So we've always had a rather diverse student body, so all ages, and you know, diversity includes age. I mean, we're going to come to the concept of culture, and that goes with the generations. We've had people who, for one reason or another, as I say, cannot enter the mainstream higher education system for daytime learning and lectures. So that's one thing. The other thing is I've been in research for my career to date, and again, in research, what we tend to do is to support those who come in with a passion for research, and we don't really ask them anything else about themselves. But even there, we're starting to look at, and now, you know, I'm going to talk about the protected categories. Are we doing enough to make sure that we're not precluding access to the protected categories in research? And that's something that I think will, once it percolates through the system, be a sea change. So that's where I've seen it.
Yeah, and you know, even when someone who has been in research for a long time and worked very closely with researchers, I agree with you with that, because not everyone learns the same way, and it's quite encouraging to see, you know, apprenticeships, T-levels, and also just recognition that not everyone is going to really be able to memorize everything and go through that formal process of sitting those exams in that sort of format. You know, schools now are taking measures to recognize children with where it's been identified that there are some issues, but the problem is it's not easy to actually get the tests and really know exactly what the issue is. Kat.
Yeah, so coming from the perspective of someone growing a small business, you know, I was saying in the pre-show chat that, yeah, there's only 7 employees, mostly all working part-time. We can't have this perfect, you know, rainbow-picked diversity, and also, you know, we are limited by the people that we're able to find and attract and recruit. Although I'm aware that is something that you can really do more to encourage diverse applicants to your roles. But for me, the really key thing I need is I'm trying to build the best life sciences communications agency. And so I need the best people. So we are fully remote. We are very, very flexible. We have part-time working where a lot of the team are sort of dealing with all kinds of issues, whether they're parents, whether they're carers, whether they're dealing with health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues. And the main thing, actually, as someone who's trying to build a business, is trying to find people who don't just think like I do. And I've been really lucky to be able to bring in people who, I mean, sometimes it is absolutely infuriating, and you have to do a lot of work to make sure that you are not talking at cross purposes and constantly butting heads when you're you want to get to the same outcome, but you're all coming at things from slightly different ways. But actually valuing that different way of thinking and people with real sort of strategic insights or different ways of doing creativity, I think has been really valuable, and trying to find those people with those kind of skills to help you grow the business. Because if you just have a homogenous mass, you don't sort of have all the bits and the skills you need to fill the gaps to kind of grow the garden.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to touch on culture after and your voice, but the thing is, we know there is an overwhelming body of evidence now to really support the fact diverse teams are more productive, and in business, it's definitely a win-win. The issue is, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable having, these different perspectives, but within teams. So, for example, your working team, you'll get somewhere saying, okay, that's acceptable there. But they're thinking at the board level, where you're at the top, it's at that strategic powerhouse level. It's really, should you have that confrontation? Should you have those diverse perspectives? And it's really where I think this is something that we need to move towards. And I think it's something that, if it's good for the business lower down, it's good for the business higher up as well. But it's obviously who gets there and who can be there. And if we're talking about true diversity, we're talking about age and everything. But we'll go to you, Philip, and then it's really where, because the thing is, with recruitment, I was going to touch on it anyway. If we're talking about diversity in its real sense, it's really where we're also talking about age. So you may have some younger individuals that should be there, or that younger perspective that should feed into the board and be, strategically inputting into the direction of the company.
I mean, yeah, in terms of our position as a talent provider to the life sciences, we've been in this market for over 30 years. We've got a really important role, because we sit between education and industry. So we have to support the STEM industry by feeding that information and facilitating that exchange of information. I guess to shift a lot of mindsets and that unconscious bias and those stereotypes that can creep in. So it's going back to grassroots. We've done lots of work with Into Science. We've got STEM ambassadors. So it's about that re-education and feeding that back to industry and then back to education. So that's a role that we take really seriously, and it's an evolving process. So that's, I guess, where SRG sort of fits into this.
Yeah. I mentioned before, board being at the top, and most people associate it with basically very seasoned individuals. But if we're talking about a diverse board, bringing diversity in, these would be individuals who wouldn't necessarily have the extensive experience. Have you, Philippa, within your position with recruiting, has the recruitment process changed to accommodate diversity on boards?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a move from that traditional. Often a lot of boards that we saw would often be made up of retired executives who obviously can bring some great perspective and some great experience. But I think COVID was a really good example in that we started to see the emergence of boards with more diversity, where people were acting executives that were in operational roles, were right at the cold face of what was going on in COVID, and were able to feed that back to the board, and to make, quick, real changes and real impact. So absolutely, I think COVID was a great example of that. And my hope is that's something that we continue to see. We have to move away, I think, from those sort of traditions that often have existed in science.
Yeah. And, one of the things would be, and I suppose there's a mixture of audience, like all levels of their career. It's really thinking, okay, diversity on boards, I'd like to contribute. How would I get to do it? How can I, what sort of training is there? How would you get access to this? Is it a network? Is it, I think this is one of the things that I think we need to be open about, because it does differ from establishment to establishment. It's like, is there a program to actually create a level playing field with someone who's been in the profession for 30 years and someone who's been there 10 years? You want that younger and earlier perspective. But the thing is, how does that person join the club, so to speak?
mean,
regards to you or Philippa, if you want to answer.
I'm just going to jump in there, just say, certainly from my observation with board level hires, often the succession planning is quite poor, it's quite reactive. Somebody suddenly needs to leave or for whatever reason, so the succession planning is often poor. So when we work with the clients, definitely one of our recommendations is to look at sort of 1, 2, 3 levels, sort of below the board, look at that diverse pool of people you have in your workforce. How can you upskill? How can you empower? How can you train and develop those individuals? And that in itself really help with that diversity. So that's definitely one of the suggestions that we often make, but we see a lot of that succession planning is quite reactive. Often it's not, those roles aren't even advertised because it's somebody they know. So that in itself just doesn't foster diversity.
Yeah, because I've seen a couple of initiatives that are encouraging trustees, to try and get more involvement with trustees. A lot of these are charities, but the thing is with companies, when you're talking about that commercial world, and then it's even if it's associations or it's to do with the profession, a lot of the time it does appear to be, or it gives the perception of being quite closed to people who are quite new in the profession. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I've, just from our perspective as well, and to add to what Philip has said, we've seen mentoring programs, as part of the succession planning where, people have been mentored if it's something that they wanted to be part of as part of their career trajectory, and that, have an ability to support that diversity of generations or age, and then also someone on the board being responsible for making sure that the voice of the broader, wider employees is brought to the board. So, and I know most of them will do that anyway. But I think that's another really important way of making sure that the voices within the organization are brought to the board and they're heard as well.
Yeah. And Kat, I know you said that it's a smaller company. Obviously, with the numbers and who's available within the industry, this is one of the limitations as well.
Yeah, this is a challenge. I've just been trying to recruit a head of content, and I'm trying to find people who've got the right kind of scientific qualifications, the right kind of industry experience, and it is quite a small pool to draw from. And so, I think one of the things we've been trying to do is just trying to get the adverts in as broad a range of places as we can. I'm not sure we've done it incredibly successfully, but also then when we have like pre-interview chats with people and finding out what is really important to them, and actually more and more people valuing flexibility, ability to work like a 4-day week and things like that. So from our perspective, that's been quite useful.
Yeah, the 4-day week, it sounds very attractive. I mean, we've seen headlines where companies have been trialing it, and really on the back of the pandemic, it's a no-brainer. I mean, people were working, that flexibility, the commitment, the loyalty. Presenteeism is not something that should be promoted, because the thing is, you don't necessarily need it for everything. I mean, certain professions, you have to be there at certain times, but the thing is, in reality, to get the job done, you'll get the job done. I think it's a level of trust anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely. And certainly, even in a small company with a lot of flexibility and a lot of part-time working, just building that high trust environment. So the key thing is that everyone knows what work needs to be done. Everyone's turning up for the meetings online that need to be turned up for, and the deadlines are being met and the client's being happy and the work's getting done. And I don't care if you do it in the middle of the night. I don't care when it gets done, as long as everyone's really clear on what the job is, when it needs to be done. And if it's not possible, that you're then being honest and coming out to the team about, okay, we need to sort this out. And the offering flexibility definitely makes for a better working culture, I think, and enables more people to come in, and then you'll get the talent where you need it, because not every talented person is able to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5, commute, everything. No one's a robot like that.
And the reality is, I mean, everyone has different levels of responsibilities, and it's really being able to, again, be inclusive, to ensure that those who have, whether it's their extended family or their young family or whatever, it's that they can deliver and they can be there. Childcare, as we know, is a real issue, and it's been headlines. Again, a lot of board members will have like young families that require that. Renos, I know you're big on company culture, and obviously company culture is paramount to attracting and retaining diverse range of individuals, but also it's really where it's not the same as it was previously. What changes have you seen over the last 5 to 10 years?
So before I answer that specific point, Angie, I was interested in what was just being said there, and I think
Sure.
what we need to focus upon is that every single hire into a company influences the culture of the company.
Yes.
And I think if we're talking about changes over a period of time, we really have to be honest and say it's the headlines about the legislation, about bringing inclusivity and diversity to the forefront of our thinking. You know, not everybody likes overt displays of solidarity with certain types of diversity, but there may be very few other avenues that people will ever encounter that if these things were not done. So I would say the obvious one in the last decade is that we're being made more aware day by day that culture is something that is not a universal and a given. And to go back to the fact that I've worked in research for a long time, I would say that it's pretty typical to get 3, 4, 5-year funding packages for people in a research team. Every time you hire somebody new, that essentially dictates the culture of the research group for the next however many years they're going to be with you. And then, you know, as people get towards the end of their funding period, they just put their head down and try and publish what they've been doing and so on. And so the mantle is passed to those who are still having fun getting to know the group and influence how things are done and so on. I think this isn't really going to change as long as that model goes, but the kind of people you're now getting have got a lot more culturally diverse mindset. In other words, you know, they're not just going to say, okay, that's how it's done, that's how I'm going to do it. They'll really bring new ways of thinking and new ways of, you know, even what you did socially 10 years ago is not the same as what you do socially now. You know, people don't, I don't know about everybody else, but, you know, 10 years ago, it was all about going out and getting a bit drunk, whereas now it's definitely not anymore about that. So in terms of a culture per se of an organization, I would say it is who occupies the tiers of influence, you know, so that the senior management layer, how much are they encouraging cultural diversity? And again, to go back to all the points made previously, we're not talking about, you know, ethnic cultures or that kind of thing. We're talking about the fact, how are things done? Is it okay for people to come in 4 days a week? Is it okay for people to come in as long as the job's done? And it's up to the top layers. I mean, again, to go back to the media, and I'm sure I'll hand off to Kat on this one. You know, after the pandemic, we got a lot of companies saying, oh, this is really cool, we'll just carry on with Zoom. And then 2 or 3 really massive influences came out and said, no way, you're coming back to the office or you're fired. And I think really that's the culture war at the moment. So 5 to 10 years, we can never, you know, ignore the fact that the pandemic has changed everything. We suddenly realized that there's a lot more that we could do to encourage inclusion from a diverse set of people, define culture in a brand new way. It is all about getting the job done and having a sense of pride and identity in the team who gets that done. So a bit rambly, I'm afraid, but that's how I look at it.
No, it's fine. Did anyone want to follow up?
I can add to that if you don't mind. So we've been doing a number of research across a broad range of organizations, and our research has shown that in the next 5 years, 57% of organizations are working toward being more human-centric. That's more human-centric, which means that they're working towards being even more inclusive and diverse. And I think that when you're talking about culture, really what we're and attracting and retaining diverse employees, we're really talking about how inclusive we are. And I think really that comes down to, and again, as Renos said, everyone who's in the organization influences the culture. And I think Kat had mentioned it earlier as well in terms of leadership. And I think that's really, really important as well, is that like we are upskilling our leaders to lead hybrid teams, to lead in a way that is open, not just to diversity of thinking and thought and culture, but open to asking questions like, how are you? You know, little small things like that, just creating these cultures where we have open communication. And then I think what that has a knock-on effect for organizations when we're talking about attraction and retention, it creates what we call this destination workplace. If we think of the workplace as this experience we want employees to come to, we want them to stay. And if we create that, we will automatically influence and attract diverse range of people, because we've created this destination workplace, this human-centric culture. And I think that when we have everything that you've spoken about already today, the 4-day week, the hybrid working, all of those things play into what that is and how we communicate that, how we tell that story externally to attract people, and it'll be really, really important. And I think that over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of organizations using that, crafting that story to attract people in, because this skills gap is so huge. And you know, we know that there's people still recruiting, you know, and there's also people who are, you know, there's lots of layoffs and that as well, with a looming recession and whatnot. So it's becoming very challenging for organizations to attract quality candidates. So I think, and again, you know, Philippa might be able to add to this as well from a recruitment perspective. I think that organizations are really going to have to really carefully craft what that story is to really attract the best quality talent. I think it's going to be a big shift in the next 5 years.
But yeah, definitely to add to that, I mean, the employee value proposition is really key. It's about creating, you know, it's defining your culture, your values, and showcasing that, but on lots of different forums, and you know, and celebrating you know, your successes, so people can visualize themselves working at your organization. There's that relatability, there's that connection, and that needs to feed through everything on your website, your marketing, everything you're doing, and be consistent, because the number one thing we get asked about candidates, well, who is this company? What are they about? What is their story? Because if they can't make that connection and that relatability, they're just going to move on to the next company. So that is absolutely critical.
And it goes beyond a badge. It goes beyond having a badge on your website.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I can agree more.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I certainly want to come in on that, because right at the very beginning, when we set up the company, we sort of sat down with my business partner and my COO. And one of the things that my partner made us do was, he said, you've got to have your company values. And we're like, we're a brand new company. There's only 2 of us. This is, and also I you know, I come from a world of working in a big charity, and the values are 4 words written in reception, and no one knows what they are and no one knows what they mean. And then in the behaviors of people, you just see them not living up to these values. So I thought it was just all bullshit. And I basically said, I don't want to do this. This is just bullshit. And he said, no, this is really important, because basically once you have your values, even as a small company, when you're starting, it is the compass by which you make decisions. And so Sarah, my COO, and I sat down and like, what are the things that are really, really important to us, our deep held values? And for us, they're the quality of what we do, integrity, that we're only going to do stuff that we know to be true and right, and we're only going to work with organizations doing good science, understanding that we understand science and people understand the value of comms and what it can do, and then respect as well. That's like, you know, that is an absolute non-negotiable. And then every single decision we've had to make about, do we work with this client, what do we do, it's underpinned by the values. All our interactions, we hire based on them, we do people's annual appraisals based on them. We really do live these values. And when you realize that they're kind of a living compass, and then collecting those stories, like Philippa said, you know, collecting stories says when someone says, what's it like to come and work for you? We've got a story about respect. We've got a story about what we do. Gathering those stories and using them to communicate. But at the heart of it, if everyone you hire is prepared to sign up to the values, you can have very different people. But it is, I think, where it's not important to have diversity is in what those really core values are, because then you will, however you think, however you interact, whatever's going on, you will be pulling in the same direction, and you're using the same things, the same points of that compass to make decisions.
And I think, you know, one important point, because we're talking about obviously diversity on the boards and the culture within a company, but it has to be at every level. Because the thing is, you can have a company that says a lot, you know, and you have teams that practice what they preach. When you read the website, it's like, it's, yeah. And then you have one or two individuals that may be on the board or maybe in whatever level doing something else. You know, I'm going to be the devil's advocate and ask this question to basically all of you with regards to ED&I. Not everyone is going to understand exactly what it is and how important it is in how you conduct yourself, because it's supposed to be the thread that feeds through everything a company does, if it really does follow, you know, that ethos. Is training the right way to do it? What do you think of training? Is there enough training taking place? And this could be from, you know, bottom up, right the way up. What are your thoughts on that? If I start with you, Renos, because I know you're quite vocal on these matters.
Yeah, I think training, you can never get enough training. I think let's make an analogy with sports people. If sports people never trained, sport wouldn't be quite as interesting to watch, right? So it's not the end performance that everybody oohs and ahs at in the crowd every week. It's all that training that went in to make that happen. And again, you know, we've covered a lot of these points, but I think training needs to be identified. So to think about what Kat said very recently, as long as you keep referring back to your compass, as you put it, Kat, you will understand what needs your company workforce has. Because if we are to agree that every new hire influences the culture of the company, we also need to know that they may throw light on you know, gaps in EDI among their colleagues, in which case you've identified a need for training. And it may work the other way. You really like this person, you've hired them, and then you think, okay, you know, we need to bring you more into line with how this company views any diversity of subjects, EDI included. So I think that training is not always going to be something that you're going to go and get a certificate in. It may be that you're going to hire in a specialist of some sorts to give specific training, or it may be that you annually do a similar training just to make sure everybody remembers the core values of the company, if that training encompasses those. So I think you can never get enough training, is my view.
And I think, just to add to that, if that's okay, because I think there's some tick the box training. You know, I've seen a lot of, here's inclusiveness training, here's unconscious bias training, tick, we've done our training, everyone's inclusive now, you know, and that can be very challenging. Whereas we've seen, as you say, Renos, getting someone in to kind of look at the broad skills or needs of the organization and applying that. So we're working with an organization at the moment who were losing a lot of their females at a certain level, and they weren't progressing within the organization up. So what we did was we trained them at that level in terms of the skills that they were missing in order to take that step. And then we trained the senior leaders to mentor the high potential female leaders. So now we've already created this kind of gap to get people moving up to senior leader level, to board level, so that it's structured and it's embedded into the organization's part of their culture. And now they've broadened it out across the organizations, not just for females, because we're supporting this problem. Now let's filter it out to all other areas and create more diversity at the top as well. So I think it's important to really look inwards as to what is really needed within our organization. Yes, we can do unconscious bias training, inclusiveness training, all those things. They create awareness, which is really, really important. But what's actually going to create the action that we can move the dial within our organization? I think that's...
Yeah, Kat.
Yeah, I've got something to add there. Again, coming from the perspective of building a very, very small company, one of the things that we do, so Shannon, our head of operations, he comes from a non-science background. He actually comes from like sort of a retail customer service background. And so that, which also in terms of diversity has been brilliant to bring that into a lot of us. We're very sort of charity psychom people. But one of the things that he brought in was something we do on a regular basis called Tea with Auntie Chanois. And it's like an anonymous forum, so we can anyone. I mean, there's only 7 of us, so sometimes it's easy to guess what's going on. But it's a way of actually anonymously raising things that people want to talk about, and then making sure that we have a very safe space where we can actually talk about this stuff. And that's where we really do talk about culture, what's working. At the moment we've been incredibly busy, so we're trying to address things like burnout, support, what do people need. So actually making sure you have that communication. And then as the boss, you have to make yourself vulnerable to this, because not everything all the time is rosy. Sometimes it's things that I've done that are not helpful and conducive to like building this culture. So it's actually having that openness and vulnerability if you are in a leadership position to go, yep, I haven't got all the answers, or maybe I want to do better. So having that forum where people can tell you really from the bottom up what's working, what's not. And so certainly growing a small company, that is what we found to be useful, trying to keep those open lines of really honest communication.
Yeah, I think safe spaces is definitely a key thing. And I don't think without standing back and really looking what it must be like for the individuals, many companies don't realize that. They feel like, yeah, we're open to hearing whatever, then it's not necessarily the case. Because the thing is, you have to ensure that there won't be repercussions based on what's disclosed. This touches on another area that I wanted to mention, because we're talking about diversity on boards and diversity in general. Many of the conditions, or many of that diverse types are not visible. For example, neurodiversity is not something that you can see and you can tell. It's if it's not visible and someone does not tell you, how do you balance having a diverse board with neurodiverse individuals there, or anyone with any sort of invisible diversity? Any thoughts on that? And also, should someone have to, one of the issues why a lot of the time someone with something that is not visible, they don't mention anything, is because they don't want to be identified just by whatever that is. Each person is an individual in themselves, and they should be comfortable in their own skin. And this is one of the issues when you're at a very senior level. It's almost as though if you state something like that, it may be seen that you're not as competent for that position. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. What are your thoughts on invisible diversity characteristics?
I mean, I think for me, it comes back to the culture again, about creating a culture where you've got that psychological safety, where you can be open. And if you choose to talk about that, and it is that individual's choice, and I think that's what's key here. But if they do choose to talk about certain situations, they have that safe and open space to do so. And I think that comes back to culture. But I think you're quite right. Some companies will claim to have that culture, but it doesn't truly exist. So it's what more can companies do to really foster that safe space? Because I've definitely experienced that myself. Early in my career, there were certain things that I would never dream to talk about. if I talk about that, it's going to count against me. But definitely, I now work in a much safer space where I can talk about those things, and I'm quite open about them, and keep my door open for others that may wish to come and speak to me about them. So it's creating those mentors, it's creating that open dialogue, that open door policy. But you know, that's tough because people say they have it, but it doesn't always translate.
Yeah. No.
And just to add to that as well, as someone who is neurodivergent, and I only found out 6 months ago, and I'm in my late 30s,
Wow.
you know, it can be quite challenging because there are a lot of people like me who don't know, because obviously we didn't have the assessments, you know, when we were much younger. So people are finding out later in life, and sometimes you may not necessarily know. You could have someone who's neurodivergent on your board and they don't even know. So it's very hard. And again, I completely agree with what Philippa has said there as well. It's about creating the culture of openness to say, okay, I'm neurodivergent. These are my needs. These are my traits. I am paying attention, even if I look like I'm not, or, you know, all of these different things. Are really important to state in you know, to your leadership team, but also then as well to my direct reports, so that they know, you know, how does that impact me as a leader? How does that impact on them, and to have those open conversations. But I think sometimes, you know, and we talk about disclosure, non-disclosure, that, you know, it's not mandatory. It's completely up to the individual, and it's completely up to how you create that culture so that they can. So I think, you know, it comes down to your values, it comes down to how you communicate, it comes down to your culture. Sometimes they may not even know, you know.
Yeah, and it's I put it out there that, you know, on the board you want a diverse board, and you want diversity across the board. So you want diversity in thought, you want gender, you know, you're looking at the protected characteristics. You're then also looking at intersectionality. You're also looking at socioeconomic background. How do you balance all of this? Because at the end of the day, the board has to function. So you need to balance and have a diverse board, but you need to have a functioning board. So it delivers what it can do or what it should do, and really steer whatever the entity that board sits on. How do you balance that? I mean, when you look at it, someone could say, like, this is impossible, you know, this call for diversity, you know, you've got the Parker review coming out, looking at all these companies and putting in deadlines and trying to say, you know, you ought to have this number on your board by whatever. But the thing is, how can I balance all of this
and avoid tokenism?
Exactly. Reynolds.
I would say it's revealing of where we are in this as a society, that we can come to a conclusion where all this is all a bit impossible. Because I think what we've touched on is, in the last couple of minutes, is there are visible characteristics, there are declared characteristics, there are characteristics that are known about but not disclosed, and then there are unknown characteristics, whether to oneself or to others.
Yeah.
And truly diverse and inclusive practices, it shouldn't even matter whether or not somebody is disclosed, or whether you can see something about that person, and so on. But I think as a society, that's not really where we're at the moment. We need to admit that, and therefore we need to focus on it. And it comes back to what I said earlier, you know, if these things aren't brought to our attention over and over, we won't move closer to that.
I'd add, it's like, at some point we do also need to remember what the ultimate purpose is. It's not to create this like perfect, you know, yeah, tick got one of those, tick got one of those, tick got one of those. The job is to create a board that functions, that has talented people that will bring the insights that will build your business. And I think it's, as society, we are now moving towards a point where we can recognize that those people who are talented, the great people that we need, do not look like retired pharma executives who are white middle-aged men. Like, we're starting to recognize that people have these diverse ways of thinking, characteristics, all these things. But ultimately, it's remembering that the important thing is you are trying to get the right people on your board that have the heart and the values to help you build your business, and just to look outside the, oh, you know, that's a big name, or these kinds of people who are a small subset of all the talented people who could have things that could actually be the right fit to help you build the business. And that's really what diversity is, not kind of trying to assemble a perfect pick list. It's recognizing that there is a much broader pool that you can be drawing from to assemble the people, the crack team, the Avengers that are going to help you build your business and move forward.
Yeah, and it's really, equity is the key aspect. It's ensuring that, you know, board entry is open to all, and if you see that it's not, then you put measures in place to ensure that it's open to all. So the right individuals are on the board, and that will lend itself to being diverse, because hopefully those individuals are within the sector. I can see that we're coming close to our time. I'd like to open up to any questions that we may have from the attendees, the audience. If you put your questions in the chat, then what we will do is pick those up. But we will continue our conversation until we have some of those. Let me have a look and see if there's something in there. Yeah. We'll continue until if anyone has any questions, please do direct them, and do say if there's any particular member on the panel that you're directing your question to. One of the things I wanted to touch on is, you know, obviously when we are talking about diversity and we're talking about various individuals and maybe some more junior individuals, or the fact that you are slightly different, and which is not a bad thing. It's really, you're on the board. One thing is having a seat on the table, but the other is being listened to and actually really contributing towards the function of that board. What are your thoughts on there? Because I know we've mentioned about culture. We mentioned culture within the company, but the thing is, again, it can be different at that very high level where, you know, basically these are seasoned individuals with a lot of authority. It's, you know, this person who doesn't necessarily have the decades of experience that some of the others do have. They may feel that I'm an imposter. It's no one's listening to me, or it's really where what I say is not carrying, it doesn't seem to be validated. It's not, the perception is that they're not taking it being serious. What are your thoughts on that, Reynolds?
So I have a possibly unkind way of viewing this one, which is imposter is as imposter does. So unless you really are an imposter, you shouldn't really feel like one. Yeah. All you should do is embrace your nervousness and just say what you've got to say, because the worst that can happen is you'll learn something new that you didn't know. And the best that can happen is you change the minds of those who thought they'd seen it all. And so it's a very worthwhile thing to have a diversity of experience across the board.
I think kind of broadening it out as well, thinking about, you know, whose voices get heard. And I think it's important, if you are in a position where you are actually able to like elevate people, and with my comms hat on, you know, who gets to talk to the public, who's representing the company, who's doing the interviews and all these kinds of things, actually enabling as many different people to do that as possible. It gives people confidence. It shows that you are diverse. It's not just always the CEO by default who's doing everything, and offering training for people if they don't feel very confident in doing that. There is plenty of media training available. And one example that I give of this, so we make podcasts for organizations, and we were working with a very big pharma company, and we always try and ask with our podcasts, we always try and assemble, you know, we've only got 2 or 3 voices to play with usually. So it's like, okay, how do we try and get a mix of gender, of background, of voices, of all these kinds of things, obviously where we need the right people to talk about the science, because that's what the podcast is. But we said to the company, it's okay, you're going to put up 3 spokespeople for the sponsored episode. Can we try and have a diverse range of voices? And they came back to us with 3 middle-aged white men. 2 of them were called Dave. I'm like, that's, and they're like, these are the people. I'm like, okay, you need to train more people to do this kind of stuff, because this is not, this is not diverse. So even thinking about how you're putting things out to the world, if you have a choice of images and pictures, is that showing diverse, not just male and female, not just different races? There are many, many more stock photos now of people with disabilities, people, all sorts of things, doing different things. So just thinking a bit more about what's actually going out to the public that reflects diversity, or if you feel like we don't have enough diversity, kind of paints a picture that this is what we want to attract and get more people who can add to our diversity. So it's about making that sort of welcoming and diverse kind of you're not putting up barriers. If you can't see it, you can't be it, all that kind of stuff. So you're not actually accidentally putting up barriers.
And I think just to add to that, if that's okay, Angie, just before you come in, I think it's important, like on any team, and a board, I think is no different. It comes back to the culture side of things as well, and allowing people to speak and feel heard. And if we create a culture, and I think a board, like any team, should have its own charter, should have its own values. And if we're living by these and breathing by these, then it means that everyone has an opportunity. There's some research out there, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but introverts need an extra 20-30 seconds before they'll say something. I'm going to check that, but so we have a thing on our own team where we will allow that time for other people. We will close every meeting by saying, does anyone else have anything else to say? Did anyone else want? And it might take them, because they need time to process. I have ADHD. Sometimes I need to go away and then come back and say, so people are different. So we need to be open to how people have diversity of thought, diversity of communication, and how they like to convey things and feel heard. So having that initial conversation with a new board or new members of the board, going, this is our charter, these are our way of working, these are our values, this is how we're going to run every meeting, so how we're going to ensure everyone gets heard and everyone listens to. We already have created that culture. I think where people feel, and again, it could be training, it could be upskilling, it could be all of those different things, but they feel that they don't have the ability to be heard or the ability to speak. It can sometimes be a cultural thing. Oh, you're joining the board and this is just how we've always done things, so we're just going to keep doing things. Whereas sometimes we need to take a step back. And
I think just to add to that, I think it's being diverse in how you run the board, stepping away from tradition. We will meet at the same time on this day at the same location, having different forums, different ways of collecting opinions. Be innovative with how you run and manage those board meetings, those board communications, create diversity that way as well. And I think that in turn will foster people to come forward and share more.
No, I completely agree. I'm going to touch on several points. Like Kat mentioned, for example, stock images and things like that. I do agree with that. I do agree that you should have, a diverse, make sure you really are reflecting that diversity and inclusion with regards to the images that you portray. But at the same time, they have to be real, because the thing is, if you use a lot of stock images showing diversity and you have all the jargon on the website, but you really go into and have a look, the composition of the board or the composition of certain teams, and they don't reflect that, then it really is, it's misrepresenting, and it's not real. A lot of, I think a lot of employees, but also individuals at whatever level are more cognizant of this. So when they go for an interview, it's not just a one-way thing. It's really where the interviewee, and it should be always this way, the interviewee is looking and assessing, is this the culture that I want to, that I will feel comfortable in? Is this somewhere that I will be comfortable in? And this is where you have, for example, non-visible diversity. A lot of the time, these individuals will be assessing, and they won't necessarily say, because it's really, if it's not right, they're not going to go there. And this is why you have, people resigning before they've even started, or just turning down offers as well. But I do think, it is unfortunately a lot of companies, and they are being called out now with reviews that are taking place, but other bodies actually going in and having a look and looking at the composition of the board does it really reflect what the company is saying as its culture and it's whatever spiel they're coming out with. One thing, I can see a question here, and this touches on, Kat, what you mentioned before, that we want to avoid building a diverse board to be like a tick box exercise. But does the panel have any advice for companies who would like to measure the diversity of their board to support transparency when recruiting for new members? So I think that speaks to basically all of you really, and it's Kat, it was on the back of something that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, you have a finite number of people, so it is like, well, how do you choose what diversity to measure? So, you know, there are, like we said, there's characteristics you can see and you can count. Should we have 50% women? Should we, you know, have an ethnic diversity mix that reflects the UK? What's possible, what's not possible? Yeah, I think it is more as well making sure that you're not putting up any barriers to including people. And that, I mean, that basically, like, if your board is entirely white male monoculture, you've probably got issues. But then again, you know, you're not, tokenism is not great. But is this actually a board that is providing the diversity of talent, skills, thoughts, inputs you need? And yeah, you know, yes, if it's a complete monoculture, you need more diversity. I don't know if there is a perfect mix, and then you do get into the, you know, you've got to tick these people off.
I think you're right when you mentioned that it's open, because obviously you're working with what there is in the sector, and you can't, although you can influence it by representation, because that's quite powerful, and it's genuine representation. It is, so you can say, you know, basically, I work in this sector, I'd like to see more people like me and whatever, but you have to work with what there is. But I think if the door is open and how things are promoted and where they're promoted provides a level playing field, that we welcome, you know, applicants for the position from, you know, every aspect, from every area, then I think that's, and it's sincere, and it really is reflected all the way along the line, whether it's, for example, if you say, you know, with disabilities, yes, still, you got how many flights of stairs and the person would never be able to get to the meeting. You know, you have someone with hearing impairments, and all your meetings never have any closed captions or anything else. Then it's not providing what you're saying. But the thing is, I think, you know, in answer to this question, there are the metrics that are definitely numerical, where you can say whatever percentage, but I think there are measures, I think there are metrics also in the things you do and the measures, the small measures you make to actually welcome, for example, others. I can see that we're coming close to the time, to the end of the panel session, but what I'd like to do is go to each panelist before we go, and really just leave, you know, on the back of this question that we had here, it's what tip would you leave for anyone, or any advice that you'd leave for anyone who is attending the session, and really anything that we haven't covered that you would like to state, because I know anyone who has any questions can follow up with any of the panelists after. But if we start with you, Alicia.
I think, you know, my advice for anyone listening would be to, you know, if you're looking for a new career and you're looking for an organization is really, you know, that really aligns to your values. And I think we've spoken about this as well in terms of culture and values. Really, even sit down yourself and work out what are your values. If you've never done that before, and I hadn't for a very long time, and I didn't realize I was working and living by my values, but I just didn't sit down and list them. I would do that as a start and make sure that when you're looking for your new career, your next step is that you're working towards with an organization that shares those same values. And I think that that's really, really important. And as an organization, you will create a destination workplace as such when you live by your values. So that would be my one piece of advice for anyone listening.
And that would be board level, whatever.
Every level, yeah.
Reynolds.
I would say mind the gap, always be aware of the gaps in your organization, be that at board level all the way through in yourself and identify the trainings and the conversations that need to happen to move you on and cover those gaps.
Kat?
I think I would wave a little flag as a communicator. I'd wave a little flag for communication, because it's very easy to hire people who think like you, whether they look like you, you know, they think like you. But when you are actually hiring people with diverse backgrounds, opinions, thoughts, ways of thinking, ways of behaving, ways that they move through the world, there's a lot of opportunity for misunderstanding, miscommunication, frustration. So establishing really clear and open communication. And I think it was Alicia that said, you know, making this amazing culture. It sounds like such a faff. It sounds really difficult, but it's just every little step towards it. And it sort of starts to become second nature. And it ultimately, if you care about this stuff, this is what you need to do. So that, you know, there you go.
And Philippa?
Yeah, just to quickly add to what's already been said, I think it's really understanding what's important to you, what your values are, and sticking to those, not settling, and remembering it is a two-way process, and that's so important. People often lose sight of that.
I completely agree with everything that's said. I think we're bringing diversity to the board. As mentioned, I think there should be measures to ensure that it's open to all, but also, you know, if there's training to be done to prepare someone for the board or mentoring, these are things that you can never get too much of. But I thank the audience for their attention, and I'll pass it over to Jazz.
Thank you so much, Andy, and to our wonderful panel. It's been a super interesting discussion, and thank you to our audience as well for attending. We will be back at midday for lunch with Claire and Ricky. It'd be great if you could join us. Feel free to bring your lunch along, put the kettle on. It'd be great for you to join us. And we've got half an hour still left to vote for the Life Sciences Inspiration of the Year Award, so please make sure you go and do that via the app. Please continue to enjoy all the other features as well, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.